Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 will tie up every loose end that we know of, including what we look like and even what the prototype really is. Let me explain with these 7 theories.
We got a #1 victory, Royale.
In every single chapter, we hear about a character named Rich, who was a Playtime Co employee that worked to provide for his family, even when he got demoted and put down throughout the factory. We see in Chapter 3 that Rich was promoted to a higher ranking position, right after getting demoted, which could mean that Rich learned what was going on in the factory beforehand. Here, take a listen.
My wife says I'm a lovely man, but I gotta control my temper. So, I'm doing it for her.
You're just different, Rich. Honest to a fault. Giving the road to you.
Really?
Really? Nothing official yet. But I think there's a decent guy beneath all that graft.
This could mean that Rich is actually us, and after learning about the truth of the factory, he quit, which would explain how he could be us. Not just this, but it would confirm why some of the toys remember us, like how Mommy, Bobby, and Catnap, which would also mean that we could have helped the orphans out in the time that we served in the factory, and actually helped them when nobody else would because the toys don't kill its on-site and let us live for as little bit, trying to get us just to leave the factory. This would also mean that we would have a very large connection to the higher-ups of the factory, which leads to the next theory. The higher-ups are still alive. I know that we hear that Elliot is dead, but I think that the scientist and many of the other higher-ups weren't actually killed in the hour of joy and were able to hide away from the toys, or they turned themselves into toys. These higher-ups could also still be being tortured and could be hanged up in the labs or poked and prodded at as revenge from the prototype. However, presuming that they're still alive and could have been turned into toys by the prototype for this amusement in Chapter 4 or 5, we might face off against one of these higher-ups in actual combat, unlike how we did with Catnap, and we will have to take down them while having to deal with the prototype. We could do this with possible a new sword or axe grab pack that used to be used, destroy faulty toys or something like that, and that we use now to kill Rouge toys coming after us. But that begs the question of why the higher-ups are attacking us and not helping us with taking down the prototype. Well, I think that the higher-ups still want to be immortalized and want to continue their experiments on the orphans because they're still alive, which is why they would attack us. From my best guess, the higher-ups also are going to hate us because we want to save the orphans. The orphans are alive. We know this because of this VHS tape which says,
Where are the kids? Please, where are the children? Are they in the same place as the employees?
No.
Are the children safe?
Yes.
Ah. Can I see them?
No.
And that was it. That's all he'd tell me. Probably because he knew I'd kill them all.
This means that Emma's Delight wanted to kill and eat the orphans, but Catnap, who is closest to the prototype, wanted to save them from the toys and the humans. This would mean that the orphans are still alive, but most likely aged or turned into toys. This is interesting because it changes the objective of the game to saving these people who have been trapped there for their whole lives, probably surviving on a few vending machines. This raises the question of where are they, and why is Ollie's voice still young? I think that the orphans are being protected or stored by the prototype in either the labs or some kind of cave. This would make sense because the orphans are clearly alive, but we have no sign of them except for Ollie throughout the chapter. The problem with Ollie is that his voice is still young, which means that he can't be an orphan because the orphans would be around 25 years old by now, which means that Ollie is whether a toy or the prototype. I believe that Ollie is actually the prototype because of how he is introduced and set up as a character. We know that Poppy knew him, but Poppy has been locked up for a long time and lacks human understanding, so she wouldn't even know if he was the prototype or not. We also hear how Ollie blatantly lies to us about Dog Day and says that he isn't alive, meaning that he didn't want us to find out about him for some reason. Ollie being the prototype is also hinted at when right after we transfuse the power, so randomly, Catnap just attacks it, and right after we have to go into a dangerous area that already has poppy smoke. I mean, come on, that's pretty obvious. Ollie had to know something or instruct Catnap to destroy the power, but the question is, where is Ollie or the prototype in Chapter 4? The prototype we know now is a collection of bodies because of this VHS. Take a listen.
Today's discovery. End of log.
Ready to talk now, are you?
This question referred to what exactly?
You stick us,
Beat us.
tear up flesh.
Do you feel it? There's a secret inside you, 1006. Valuable beyond all measure. I cut and prod and burn at it. And I get closer with each session. So speak. Or don't. Fight. Or give in. Regardless, I learn something new about you every day. It excites me. Thank you. You thank me? Absolutely. I learn something new about you every day.
This means that when the prototype assimilates toys, they become a part of him, which is really creepy, and also means that he has achieved most likely a higher form of consciousness and hatred for us. This would also mean that we would have a boss fight for the prototype that would combine everyone that we have seen so far. Just imagine us being chased down a labyrinth of dead bodies while Mommy Longlegs' arms are trying to get us, and Catnap's gas is making us go in and out of hallucinations. That would not only be terrifying, but extremely fun. The other question is about the prototype, is where will the prototype be? Well, we actually know this because of this VHS tape we see in Chapter 3, which says this.
The prototype, his home is in the labs. This is your life now. Get used to it.
This means that the prototype is still most likely in the labs, which we know is most likely the biggest part of the factory that might act as a sort of catacombs area for the dead bodies. This is because the labs is where they poke and prod at the toys to see how they tick, and not just that, where they take the orphans to start the transitioning process. This would mean that possibly Chapter 5 would take place in the labs because it seems like Kissy was taken somewhere else higher up after Chapter 3. Chapter 4's main antagonist dragged Kissy to some sort of area that is above the playcare or around it. This begs the question of who the antagonist is, and where is he or her staking Kissy. We know that Chapter 4's main antagonist isn't the prototype, but instead is some sort of new character, because of the developers saying that they are modeling a whole new toy. This would mean that Chapter 4's antagonist will probably be a girl, judging by the trend of previous chapters, and will also not be a mammal or a bug. This would mean that Chapter 4's antagonist will be possibly a reptile or bird-like creature, which would explain Bunzo's fall. This antagonist we know is also terrifying and most likely supports bright colors like the previous antagonists. But this begs the question of where does this antagonist reside? Well, I think that I already know. Chapter 4's location has been a mystery, but I think that it will be in the Innovation Station. This is because we already know that it exists, like how we knew that the Playcare exists before Chapter 3, and we also know that it plays a very large role in the Poppy Playtime lore. The Innovation Station we know is the place where they would assemble and also repair the toys, which would mean that this could be where certain toys will be modified. That's right, I think that the main antagonist of Chapter 4 takes toys and modifies them to be terrible monsters for their own suiting. This would make Poppy Playtime take a much darker turn, with not only making the orphans become toys, but then also be modified and turned into dying monsters that lack anything that they used to represent. This might be why Poppy was so terrified when Kissy was dragged, because she knows that she might become a threat later on because of this. This would mean that also we would have to face off against multiple modified toys throughout the chapter, making Chapter 4 very similar to how Resident Evil 4 was in the Resident Evil franchise, meaning that we will be mostly fighting off enemies in combat rather than just solving puzzles for hours on end. This would also mean that we might have a fighting chance against the Chapter 4 villain after we get multiple powers-ups throughout the chapter. Following this, with everything we know about Chapter 4, I believe that the plot will occur just like how I describe it. We will start off by raising up in the elevator to Kissy, only for the elevator to bring us to seeing her being dragged away into a strange place by a large claw. I believe that we will follow Kissy in an intense chase scene that the start and will end up entering the Innovation Station. The Innovation Station will have multiple layers and will be a large factory area with quadrants that include the toy processing area, toy repair area, toy storage, and the toy test area. These areas would all have their specific bosses, which would be Daisy because of previous hints with the developers, Killy Willy because of the toy modification that the antagonist does, Picky Piggy, see my other video for an explanation on that, and the main antagonist, which I image to be a mad scientist that will put us through multiple experiments with some of his modified toys. I think that we will make a new hand that can fight off these hostile toys that he makes, and I think that they will function similarly to how the Butcher Gang does in Ben Andy and the ink machine. This would mean that this chapter would be combat-oriented and would include us doing puzzles constantly like how we did with Miss Delight, but we can actually fight back. After we go through all of these areas, I believe that we will face off against either the main antagonist or Kissy, and end up having to kill both so that us and Poppy can live. After all of this, I believe that we will look in a mirror and punch it like Walter White, then go with Poppy to the labs, where Chapter 5 is located and where the game will end. Like, sub, and praise God.